Ms. Stevens. Ms. Stevens is absent at the moment. Ms. Baker?
Here.
Ms. Simon?
Here.
We have a quorum. Also like the record to reflect that Councilman Miller is also in attendance.
Okay. Seeing how I think I know everybody in the room, is there any public comment in regards to the minute?
No, Mr. Chair, no one is signed
Okay.
in.
Hearing none. The minutes of the November 18th, 2019 meeting have been presented to us all. Has everybody a chance to look at them and review them? Okay, we have one yep. Is that a move, motion, Dixon?
Second.
And I'll second. Oh, do we have a second over here? Yes. Any discussion in regards to the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor of the minutes, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Same sign. No opposition. We have one matter to take before the committee. If you could please read that in the record.
Resolution number 2019-0255, authorizing an economic development loan in the amount not to exceed $1,500,000 to ARC Impact Program for the benefit of leveraging equity and debt investments with positive social impact.
Okay. Is there anyone here that can bring clarity to this? Because I think it was a little bit different program that was presented to us last time. There was no pro or against opposition. It was just looking for more clarity in regards to how it works.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good afternoon. Ted Carter, Chief Economic Development and Business Officer for Cuyahoga County. Just to restate what we covered in the last hearing, as was read into the record, we are requesting approval for a $1.5 million loan to ARC LLC, which represents Arteris, which is a social impact fund based in Boston. The term of the loan is 10 years at 2%, projected to create 500 jobs over that 10-year period. Again, Arteris is a national social impact fund whose partners have committed to invest approximately 1% of their own equity into the fund, up to $5 million. The fund will also focus on projects that have a social impact, and that is defined as access to quality jobs, both spatially and from a wage standpoint, so to support underrepresented businesses and entrepreneurs, create and preserve affordable housing, I mentioned accessible jobs, improve health or environment, and or provide a greater community benefit as defined by our Social Impact Collaborative. And that collaborative is comprised of GCP, the Gunn Foundation, Fund for Our Economic Future, the City of Cleveland, and ourselves. While Arteris will invest in projects across the U.S., our capital will only be deployed in Cuyahoga County Opportunity Zones. That's the equity portion of it. And we'll focus on providing investments to manufacturing-related companies in Opportunity Zones, though this is not an exclusive focus. There are scenarios where the county could lose a portion of its principal, though each loan made by the fund is underwritten specific to the company and is generally secured. We also believe that focusing on manufacturing companies will reduce this risk. Arteris' performance over the past 6 years, 40-plus loans, includes 2 default losses and minimum delinquencies. They service their loans to national standards. The job creation for the fund that's been in existence since 2013 has been close to 1,000 jobs. In the instance of any defaults, they were able to recover the majority of their investment back. Kresge has provided a $15 million guarantee on Arteris Opportunity Zone Fund. Cuyahoga benefits from this guarantee to the extent it is available for any Opportunity Zone deals in the county, which have an equity component. I also sent a memo prior to Thanksgiving holiday, which addressed some of the questions that came up in the last hearing. So I'm happy, and we're happy to answer any questions about what we said at the last hearing or as a follow-up to the memo.
Could you reiterate the names of the other funders that are at the table?
At the moment, it's just a Gunn Foundation who has co-invested alongside us. They provided a commitment of $500,000, and we anticipate Arteris and the collaborative is in discussion with a local bank as well as one of the foundations.
Okay, you listed GCP in the city, I thought.
No, I mentioned them as part of our social impact collaborative.
Gotcha.
So, yes, so
Okay.
they're not funders at this point.
Okay, so the only other funder at the table locally is the Gunn Foundation?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and we had that presentation at the last meeting.
Yes.
Okay, is there anticipation of other funders, do you think, likely coming forward?
Yes, one of the banks is very interested, and so as we saw with the Workforce Connect effort, they're waiting for the public sector to step up and be the catalytic lead investor, and then the foundation. Those discussions are ongoing but haven't concluded yet.
Okay. Questions from committee members? Pardon?
I'll
Sure,
start.
go ahead, Ms. Baker.
Okay, the 1.5 million, that is the county's contribution,
Yes.
and that's for 10 years?
Yes.
Let's say in 5 or 6 years, we've seen no action, money's not being used, we just are disappointed in the results. Is there any way we could get any of that 1.5 million back before 10 years is up?
Yes, what we've agreed to, Councilwoman, preliminarily, and all this will be memorialized in the closing docs, is we would deploy a portion of that 1.5, and if there's no activity within 18 months, actually, this is a lot short. I think they
Okay.
proposed 3 years, we dialed it back to 18 months.
Okay,
Then we would receive the principal back.
you would after, okay.
Yeah,
Continue?
just to pick up on that, our 1.5 is proportionally related to the other dollars that are coming into a particular investment, or are they not? So our dollars would not be taken down from 1.5 all the way down to 0. They're going to be put in on a proportionate basis of all the other investors that are putting money on the table. I thought was
Correct. That's correct.
Okay.
so. If other groups are coming in at 60, 70, 80%, then we're just picking up the last dollars going into the transaction.
That's correct.
Okay. Other questions? Does that help? Sure, absolutely. That's what we're here for.
Okay, so I've been looking, investigating a bit on the Opportunity Zone as it exists today. And certainly has been supported by all the organizations, I think that you mentioned, GPC and there's quite a few
City
here
of
that-
Cleveland, Gun.
City of Cleveland. So how is, with the unveiling of the Opportunity Zone, and I have here when it came out in March of this year, talking about investors can take profits from unrelated investments, put them into real estate businesses or infrastructure in an Opportunity Zone, and benefit in a few ways: delaying paying taxes on capital gains, putting money into a fund focused on Opportunity Zones, avoid paying taxes on a portion of those original gains if they maintain their Opportunity Zone investments. So how does this vision that was released back in March, how does this and what you're presenting today, how does that combine? How is it that we need to take this and then launch what you're suggesting?
It's a great question, Councilwoman. So I would answer two ways, then I'll invite Mr. Herget to come up and give it his perspective. But the one, as we've talked about, when we talked about the opportunities, that's a private market mechanism. So it is, and so a lot of the criticism has been around potential gentrification. So the early investors and investments are going to go toward the safest areas of distress. So that in the entire downtown area, for example, is an opportunity zone. So you can imagine with all these assets, the Global Health Innovation Center and other things like that, that's going to be very attractive to an investor. So what we have said with our terrorists, because of the deficiency of institutional capital availability to companies in the opportunity zones, in our instance, what we've aligned is toward manufacturing for the reasons you heard at the last hearing,
Right.
is that we will have capital available along with our kind of cheerleading to go into zones that wouldn't get that initial look. And so, so that's the simplest answer to your question. So it doesn't preclude private sector investment, but where there is private sector investment that hasn't occurred, where we want it to occur, this partnership will step in to make that capital available.
So if I may, so you're talking about the more difficult zones, and that criteria is in this legislation, that it will be the most difficult zones?
Well, the legislation says opportunity zones, 64 that have been designated
Okay.
within the county, but we did in the legislation kind of stratify which ones are more attractive and which ones are less attractive.
Right, because it says here in this article from March, local communities help come up with a list of tracts that met the program's criteria, including having at least 20% poverty rate.
That's correct.
That's what the original opportunity zone. So how is that different? How are you, 20% poverty rate is, where are you segregating that piece that has 20% poverty rate into your program that's going to be addressing even more so those that are
Yeah.
less
I
fortunate?
guess what I would say, Councilwoman, we haven't created a further delineation. So let me just rewind for a second if I could. So when the program was launched at the national level, the baseline criteria, no zone could be created, no investor could receive the federal tax benefits unless they invested in a fund that was invested in a census tract that had that level of poverty.
Okay.
So what we're saying is, so some of those census tracts have already been the beneficiary of private market activity. So I think we've got 30 projects so far that are listed in our Opportunity CLE platform.
Okay.
So this is capital instigated by the county to bring additional capital that doesn't currently exist in the marketplace
Okay.
to these zones that have a social benefit. So in those census tracts, without that social impact criteria, the investors can expect the highest market return possible that may not be achieved in zones that still have this poverty criteria, but are still more difficult because of historical factors, things like that.
Right,
We did believe that in the zones that we put forward to the state, that we created a filter that presented the zones that we thought were most economically attractive. Because we were in competition with rural areas in Ohio, Columbus, and others that also had poverty. And
Right.
so we wanted to, if you recall, we used this term, we wanted to achieve our maximum number of zones from the state. And so we submitted 95, we got 64. So that was a pretty good, pretty good, what's the word I want to use?
Success rate,
So,
right?
yes, exactly. The other thing I'd say, the reason for this kind of short window is the clock's already started ticking on when the trigger for the Opportunity Zone tax benefit can start. So we're anxious to get going, and if no one uses it, then we will get our money back. But the predicate from our standpoint with our members of our collaborative is, since I've been in this job 4 years, I can't think of when we've had someone knock on our door and say, we want to invest capital in this market.
Yeah.
And so now we've tailored it further and said, we're going to focus it on hard-to-reach opportunity zones, but also on our legacy industry, manufacturing. And so that's not,
right.
somebody say, well, we're playing to the audience here. No, and as you heard Dr. Artera's executive talk about the benefit of that, both in terms of job creation and manufacturing industry is immovable. So they're not going to invest in and move the companies, or the likelihood of them doing that is not high. So we'll see pretty soon here whether this innovation, and I call it that, is going to work or not. As I shared also,
Yeah.
there are some that say, well, there's no demand for equity in this market. We think there is. Our hope is that this will be realized and the demand for that. But we've got to market it. We've got to sell it. And again, the unique feature here is the social impact. So we're one of the few communities in the country, even if we don't do this, we still have a social impact system that we put in place. And so if a company invests in an opportunity zone, irrespective of this program, and says, we want additional public sector investment, our collaborative has said, you've got to meet these social impact standards. And so we're going to grade, if we know about the project,
Yeah.
each project along these 6 or 7 criteria, and then they'll get a social impact badge. But this program is designed where there may be private sector investment, and if they don't come to the county or the city, we'll never know about it because they don't have to register at the moment. There is a conversation about how do we measure, or the federal government measure the, I'll use this word because they're using data analysis, longitudinal impact of what's been created. So
Okay.
that is, hopefully that answers your question.
That's helpful. 2 questions out of that, if you don't mind, Chair. The the social impact piece, that if what this doesn't play out as you hoped it would, and having the social impact piece in place anyway, is there any concern that you may be discouraging investment because they have an additional criteria of social impact?
You mean through this fund? I don't think so, because again, they've proven this model in Michigan.
Okay.
They've been pretty successful. Yeah, I don't think so.
You
I
don't think
believe
so?
it is, yeah.
And then the hard-to-reach areas, which is where you'd like to see the investments made?
Right.
And maybe I didn't hear you, is that identified in this legislation, the hard-to-reach? Or could they go to the low-hanging fruit that's downtown Cleveland and invest using this
They
program?
could go to the low-hanging fruit. I mean, any investor can.
Right?
What we described, we're not involved in the underwriting of each project, but we do have essentially what amounts to a veto if it doesn't meet the social impact criteria. And so that is, in the legislation, will be, as part of the close, the structure and mechanism for that.
I see. Okay, thank you. It's helpful.
Other questions? Anybody else? One of the things you talked about, or I think the gentleman from Artera, was that they had put board positions on from some of the other investors into their fund. They did not necessarily put the community on there because they said they got community input from some of their advisory positions. Have we asked or sought out any board position in regards to this so that we could have a voice at the table when they're actually making decisions about these social impacts?
Board position over the entire fund, national fund, is that what you're referring to?
No, this is not, over what's going on here in Cleveland.
Right, so there's gonna be a social impact committee and mechanism that we haven't fully definitized yet, where we will have the ability through that mechanism to say whether a project meets our social impact or our joint social impact criteria.
That's my point. On that committee, have we asked for a position to be on that committee?
Yes, we have asked we haven't identified how that will work, but yes, we will have some.
We have a seat at the
mechanism.
table,
Yes.
is what I'm trying to get to here.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
all right. So our voice clearly of social impact can be heard as to and have we prioritized those 7 criteria within the social impact as to what's important to us? Not what's important to them, but what's important to us?
We have not prioritized, these 7 are a result of our kind of collaborative discussions with the group I mentioned, but we haven't sat down as a team and gone through those 7 and said, this is more important. But as a general matter, the county executive I've already spoken to, and the work we're doing in the workforce area talked about kind of the wage level we'd like to achieve, that family sustaining wage that we've talked about, but we haven't defined what that is for these particular investments and things of that nature.
Okay, could you share what these, obviously wage was one of the 7, I assume. What are the other 6?
Let me reread it. Access to quality jobs, both spatially, and that means just, geographically, and from a wage standpoint, supporting underrepresented businesses and entrepreneurs, creating and preserving affordable housing, and creating accessible jobs, improving health or environment, access to community services, or provide a greater community benefit as defined by our social impact collaborative.
Okay. Somebody from our side ought to at least look at those and identify which is item 1, which is item 2, and give some kind of priority to it. If they're important to us, we just came out of a conversation about budgets and health and human services and what are the big driving forces. We ought to be able to know the same thing on the economic development side. So would appreciate it before we actually vote on this thing in its final form, when it gets to council, if you can have those in a priority.
Priority order.
What you consider people. I'm not trying to set it. The county executive ought to know what's important to, if we're going to tell the Artera folks that these are 7 criteria, the logical thing they're going to ask is, okay, what's the priority on?
Okay.
In the Michigan situation, was Kresge at the table also as a background supporter on funding? I see it.
You may know.
I see it
I don't
shaking
believe
of the
they
head.
were. I think Treasury was the backstop there, right?
That was when the Treasury program still existed.
Right.
Okay, so
So
all right,
Kresge is new, specific to this new fund.
okay, all right. And total value, what we think this fund's gonna be worth when fully up?
A minimum of, let me just do the calculation again, because we've, numbers, Paul, do you remember what the numbers are at the top of your head?
So, Members of the committee, Paul Herdig, working with Ted Carter. On the assumption that at least $3 million will be invested locally, and we're 2/3 of the way there, because we're 1.5, God is 0.5. On the assumption we can get up to 3, then it would be a minimum of a $20 million fund.
Okay, so $20 million, we represent at that point in time in a $20 million fund, we're going to be representing 7.5% then.
Correct.
Is that,
That's correct.
okay. All right, so, and then is 20 million where it's going to cap out at? Is that, I mean, sometimes funds are designed to raise a certain level of capital. Is this a $20 million raise or can it go above that?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of council, our terrace folks would like to go beyond 20 million. They have aspirations to continue to get local investment. They could absorb at least a total of $10 million local investment if available. So it is not a capped, it could be open-ended. We're being conservative just based on what we know in terms of who may be interested.
Okay, and fund calls, sometimes when they go above a certain, whatever the threshold, the investors have to come back up and step in to keep the same level of participation they had. Do we have any obligation to come in at a higher level once the 20 million has been reached?
We do not. And our investment structure is a loan, so it is a closed-ended loan with clearly defined conditions in the loan agreement how we disperse.
Okay, yeah, but sometimes you've got to keep your percentage at 7.5%. So if it goes to 30 million, we still have to keep it 7.5.
It's not the case.
Okay, that's great. That's great. So we cap out at the maximum of 7.5% when they get to $20 million. Other questions in regards to that? And the Kresge Foundation is in for $15 million guarantee. Is that my understanding based on what you said?
So again, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Kresge Foundation is guaranteeing the equity investments on a deal-by-deal basis up to $15 million.
Right, which is all we're putting our money in on the same basis, are we not?
Our funds go into both equity and possibly debt, so the Kresge guarantee applies to the equity portion of the funds,
Okay, not the debt portion.
not the debt.
Okay, so if we're doing a debt piece of an instrument, is there any, do we have any surety on our piece if it's going not to equity but to debt?
What we've been assured is that the fund that makes the loans, the debt, will take security on a deal-by-deal basis from the companies they make the loans to. These will be the traditional types of personal guarantees, corporate guarantees, key executive life insurance, securitization on the assets that underlie the transaction on a deal-by-deal basis. So
Okay.
that, combined with the track record, as Ted mentioned, is the reason for our assessing this as having some risk but not unreasonable risk.
Okay, so that item of security, that whether it's be filed with the UCC or whatever it happens to be, that is going to run back to the fund. It'll be the named beneficiary of that security. We will not be recipient of that.
That's correct.
So we'll not be in any kind of linkage with the security.
Correct.
Okay. Other questions? We've got at least two other lawyers that would love to ask those kind of questions too. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Jobs Ohio recently announced that they are reorganizing and that they are now going to be spending more time with small business. And same, I think, with the opportunity zones and helping smaller businesses with the money that they need, higher risk. Is this, is Jobs Ohio and what you're proposing, are you working together? And it sounds like there's some similarities as to what they are now going to be focusing on versus what they have in the past.
Yes, we are working with them on a number of projects. I can't say that they are not an investor, co-investor in this. Actually, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
In terms of the remaining money we need to raise. What we've heard even as recently as this morning is that they are interested in having a higher profile in this marketplace, Cuyahoga County specifically, but they are not part of this platform at the moment.
With their change in venue from going from the big companies now looking at, which is where most of the business comes from, is small business. Do you see an opportunity to work with them and perhaps because of their change of direction, that this could perhaps be something that they would be interested in being a partner or investor?
For sure, particularly because it's manufacturing focused. A lot their Revite program in particular, where they do brownfield environmental cleanup. I think it's going to be particularly attractive. So actually, it's a great idea, Councilwoman. So actually, that's a good action item for us coming out of this hearing, regardless of the outcome of the vote, is to engage them around their small business strategy, which we haven't done yet. We're just starting our 2020 planning.
Right.
So,
Okay, good. Just looks like that could be an opportunity for us, that's all.
yep.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, my only other comment, it would be that the more funds that we get, they're county-specific, they want to invest in both equity and capital is a good thing. So I know we're going to be talking about another one right after this, though it's not legislatively connected with the London Stock Exchange. The more people we have that want to invest in creating jobs in this area, I think is a good thing. Do you have any idea as far as what kind of jobs you would translate the $20 million into as far as a multiplier when fully invested?
Well, they project, and we confirmed this again with them this morning, that what they've modeled over the 10 years is 500 jobs over the 10 years. 500.
Okay, so
And so this is an anecdote, but even as a result of the Cranes article that was out last week, they already have one international lead in the manufacturing space that's interested in participating in this program and relocating to the county.
well, if we get $20 million working, of which we only contributed 1.5 million, and we get 500 jobs, that's a huge return of when that happens. Other questions? Hearing none,
Second reading.
One passage and second.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Got that.
is there any agencies to passage of this?
Yeah, so this was we'd like it passed the second read only because we're anxious to start to market the program within the county, start this 18-month clock ticking. And so the Arcturus team did say, when they were here last time, hey, we can start before the end of the year, that would be preferable.
Okay. What I would prefer, as far as an addition to your county plan, is you guys to identify every single fund that could be available. And even if we're not participating actively in it, we should be able to drive suggestions to, hey, here's a fund over here, here's another fund over here, here's capital over here, and try to drive business activity as part. I know one of the things that you pride yourself on, Mr. Carter, is being a linkage, not necessarily being the provider of money. And so if we can provide that linkage to these funds, like the London Stock Exchange or any of these other things, that should be on our short list of talking about it, and those that we have money invested even more so.
Okay, sir. Yep.
Any other questions, comments? The chair will move that this will go forward for a second reading suspension at the next council meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. This would be a nice segue right into the London Stock Exchange. So just to quickly let people know that this is not a ticker tape, that there's going to be having people reading individual shares of stock. If you can tell us what the London Stock Exchange is here in Cleveland. Okay? I know it's not the London Stock Exchange. You have to add the word elite, I think, as I recall, every time you refer to it.
Deck here, if I can pass that up so people can flip through it if you're interested in going.
Do you have
through it.
slides in this?
No, I do not have slides. I couldn't get this electronically, but
We'll start it down there and pass it
I
along.
do need to get that back, please. Or I can make copies.
Okay, tell us what the
Okay.
London Stock Exchange Elite Initiative is.
Okay, so the London Stock Exchange Elite Initiative. So we are going to be requesting through Board of Control a $200,000 forgivable loan. So this is an affiliate of the Logos Stock Exchange. This will be their U.S. headquarters. They also have a headquarters in London, obviously, and Milan, Italy. Projected to create 40 jobs over a 3-year term of our loan, forgivable loan. And the best way to think about it is as a B2B platform that will focus on companies with a revenue of $5 million or greater and that have a growth mindset. And so they specifically have an emphasis on growing their company through access to capital, global business stakeholders, investors, advisors, and other companies. And so they are in 40 countries. connected to 1,000 companies with a total of $80 billion in revenue in 36 sectors, and those companies represent 476,000 employees. They have a core focus on mid-market companies that, again, have a growth mindset, and selected Ohio and Cleveland, Cuyahoga County, because of our central geographic location in the United States and our access to a manufacturing base. So we will be part of a consortium that identifies a cohort of companies, and their C-suite executives go through a year-long program that have a focus on marketing, strategy, financing, capital, access to talent, the structure of their company, which includes governance, risk management, and operations, and then innovation. Their conference will be held here in September, so a component of these 1,000 companies will come here that have already graduated through the program. And so the benefit of this is a global brand that is headquartered here in the county. When these companies participate in the cohort, and they could be local companies, which we will strive, working with GCP to get, but also global companies. And when those global companies come to Cleveland, we will have an opportunity to engage them to stay here in Cuyahoga County. So obviously, because it's a London Stock Exchange, at the far end, once you go through their entire program, there's a private placement mechanism where their financing arm can then provide capital to companies that successfully go through this year-long experience. And again, they really focus on growth companies, which is interesting because you say everyone in the private sector is focused on growth. What we found through Skill Up is that everybody doesn't want to grow. And so that is a particular distinction that they really, when talking to the CEO, I said, well, how do you ascertain that? And they have some kind of methodology that determines whether you really want to grow. And right, grow comes with grit, so I guess I can understand that. And so again, phased in over 3 years, 40 jobs. The first 2 professionals will start here early next year. We've met one of them, and in this job, in this instance, the forgivable nature of this was to kind of induce them to come here to Cuyahoga County. They were looking at Columbus. In fact, Columbus was a little further ahead of us in their initial thinking. And so there are a number of companies in Columbus that were part of this exploratory phase, but they like what they've seen of the county. They like the manufacturing base. And so, again, this, just like Arcturus, won't be something that just happens. It will take the leadership and partnership of my office, GCP, and others to really realize the full fruits. But I think what you're seeing now is innovation and leadership coming out of the county into the private sector, which I think is, and then we weren't the lead here, we were a partner. And so our $200,000 was part of the Jobs Ohio. You saw their full page ad in the plain deal. I hope if you haven't, we should get your copy because it's interesting. First time I've seen that here, Mr. Chairman. But, you know, so there's a collaborative between state, city, county, and GCP and Jobs Ohio. So that in summary is, they also have, as a component of this 12-month experience, national partners in the consulting field. So once you go through this program, I think Deutsche Bank is one of their permanent partners that supports the companies, Deloitte and other resources that these companies can take advantage of. So our job will be to get the maximum number of Cuyahoga-based companies into the cohort and then connect with this global network.
So unlike the Arcturus, which is more startup or early stage, this has to be more than likely a company that's moved beyond the early stage and is in secondary stage of operations.
That's $5 million in revenue, yes, sir.
Okay. Yes, Ms. Baker? This is going to, for funding, this is not going to come before this body. It's going to go before the Board of Control, so.
Right, so Gavin said that, given I'm on Board of Control.
Hear this twice.
Well, you know what, first of all, thank you for bringing it to economic development so we could get a full understanding for more than just Dale and I and the others when we're talking
It was
about.
the chairman's idea, so when we
Yeah.
talked about it, so.
I appreciate that.
Sorry.
Yeah, no,
I stick my nose in a tent that I don't belong in.
that, it certainly helps. So I appreciate having the heads up before it comes to Board of Control. So just so did I hear this, first of all, is there a physical presence of the Elite Initiative here in Cleveland?
Good question, Councilwoman. Not yet. So they are evaluating sites. I think They have 3 to 5 that they're looking at, and so I'm not at the liberty, nor do I know which site they're looking, where they'll land, but they are, as we speak, evaluating and assessing sites.
And those sites that they're assessing, if it's not in Cuyahoga County, it'll be in a surrounding nearby.
Their commitment is to Cleveland, so I believe it will be
commitment is
someplace in
Cleveland.
downtown.
Okay.
Yes.
And how many employees will they bring with that first initial presence?
The early commitment is 2 early next year, but over our 3-year horizon, which is how our loan is termed, it'll be close to 40 new jobs.
40 new jobs that Elite Initiative will.
Higher, yes.
Okay. And this 200,000
Yes.
is for 1 year? Is that what I heard?
No, it's for the term, I think we had a term of there's 3 years.
3 years.
Yeah.
So for 3
So it's
years.
one-time loan.
One-time loan. And
Forgivable.
this is a loan,
It's a forgivable loan, so yes,
forgivable, okay. And
based
so,
on the job creation. Yeah.
They have to deliver the 40 jobs
Yes, sir.
to be successful, I assume.
Yes.
is that right?
Yes.
That's written in the legislation?
If it's not in the legislation, I haven't read the legislation, to be honest with you, it will be in our closing doc. So if it's approved, it will be presented to Board of Control as a forgivable loan.
And a forgivable loan pending 40 jobs?
Yes.
Is that,
That's actually a pretty big, that's the biggest multiplier I've ever heard. If to get 40 jobs out of $200,000 is a big multiplier. I don't know, I can't remember us ever getting that many jobs for that small of an investment. And I know you should never use 200,000 as small in the same sentence, but it is relatively small.
I would
If
say these are
that's-
going to be white-collar, high-paying jobs, but again, because of the international dimension, depending on what companies, and we have started to talk about this when we talked about the 5-year, kind of the tertiary effect of our investments, we sometimes don't focus on, but this will be one where that 200,000 will leverage additional investment. Hopefully, if these companies come, expand, but that's something we're going to, I think, in 2020, really present this company with the full picture of how our investments work, besides the direct investment that we make, benefit of the direct investment.
so at the end of 3 years, and that 200,000 has been invested, we'll have a track record
Yeah.
for future investments. I would think you would want to
Yes.
continue the program.
Yes, ideally, that's the aspiration. Now, I think it's a win, just again, to the chairman's point, to secure, and you'll recall that we only do a forgivable loan when we're trying to induce a headquarters-related entity. So that's what we've done selectively in the past. Again, a global brand. So it just starts to, hopefully, and I'm elaborating a little bit, start to see the connection with the 5-year plan and some of the elements. We've talked about rebranding the city and the county as a global economic marketplace.
Okay.
So you start to see these things start to come together. Now,
Mr. Miller? Oh, I'm sorry, were you done? Ms. Mc-
yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
For the Cleveland operation, what kind of people are going to be their customers and what kind of services are they going to provide?
well, the Cleveland operation will, as I understand it, will be to source the companies for these cohorts, these year-long cohorts, connect to the mothership in London, and help the companies that participate here locally connect to their 1,000 companies around in these 40 countries. And service them with the different elements, components, marketing, strategy, finance, et cetera.
So this is like a capacity development program.
Yes.
And are the participating companies you expect they're going to be local companies or at least in the region?
Some will be, yes, but the cohort is bigger than the region. So, again, the secondary benefit is even assuming the worst case, we got no local companies, which shouldn't be the case. We're bringing companies from around the world to Cleveland. And so much like we didn't talk about plug and play at length, but there we have, Silicon Valley-based accelerator bringing companies in the healthcare space to Cleveland for their evaluation. So what we're working on is to engage these companies more effectively when they're here, to entice them to stay and see this as a place to grow their business. And so here, we have that in mind out of the gate in terms of the expectation around this partnership. Where plug and play, we weren't as explicit. And so,
Well, unlike, again, Octeris, those companies that they're soliciting will be in Cuyahoga County if our dollars are used in the Octeris opportunities to grow somebody in this county. These dollars are more for, it's to create almost like a consulting organization. And wherever their client happens to be located is where they're going to be providing that service.
right. I call it a B2B platform, so it's a global B2B. So if you really think of access to new markets, to capital, to consulting resources, and so they have, if you look at the back of that presentation, you'll see, I think on page 53 or 54, a list of all of their, what they call elite partners. So I mentioned two of them, Deutsche Bank and Deloitte. So they have access to these. BDO as their advertising partner. So you have these global iconic brands that typically a company, a medium-sized company, that wouldn't have access to. So through this platform, they have that, which is, you know,
But unlike the 500 jobs that we were just talking about with Octeris, those will be Cuyahoga specific. These
Yes.
40 jobs, which are providing as almost like a networking service to businesses, will be the only guaranteed jobs that will stay in Cuyahoga County.
Correct.
The other jobs is going to be a pull factor, whether we can pull them into Cuyahoga County. But once they're here, they find all of us nice, warm people and the great weather we have.
weather, no
And there's no
question.
reason to think they won't end up putting their investments here.
that's the hope. That's the hope. Again, all you can do is get out here in the marketplace and, you know, and what I love about this, and you heard me talk about it since I presented the Flourish 5-year, is to be a global marketplace. And so this is the first opportunity we've really had to achieve that at this type of scale.
40 people can bring even one company internationally to locate in Cleveland, Ohio, and we put $200,000 in. That is a home run on top of a home run at that point in time. Okay, other questions?
Just
Yes,
one.
sure, Ms. Baker. You guys are going to get a chance to ask some additional questions too
Yeah, we're
going
going to be
on.
ready to go in Board of Control. Yes, the blockchain that now is, has given us a blocked land, which I think there's been some speculation that they too would come and be a place where they're trying to connect on a global. How does that fit into this elite initiative?
Block land connected to,
Block land
Block
now.
land.
It was blockchain, now it's block land, talking about
Yep.
some offices.
yeah.
Is there a connection or no?
Let me see if I can create one. How about- No, I would say the goal of block land is to create blockchain-oriented companies, and for that, this to be the epicenter of that activity. To the extent that some of these cohorts have a blockchain affinity, you
Yeah.
could see it happening, and we'd have to create one if that takes off, because then we would be, just like with a medical hub, we'd be the blockchain hub if that
Right.
vision is fully realized. A lot of these companies, conceivably, if you look at the different sectors on one of the pages, would benefit from blockchain. So you could see, it wouldn't be a stretch to create strong connective tissue, but that's not, I guess, how we thought about it. That wasn't one of the things we said, hey, come here before blockchain at that point. But,
Right.
you know, again, we should be, to your earlier point, is creating all the ties we can.
I just,
with the
you know,
different
don't want to, you see a lot of initiatives, don't want to work in silos.
Yep, no, that's a
Right.
good point.
Yeah, you want to,
And I'll throw you a lifeline on that one, because I believe when New York, or when the London Stock Exchange Elite gets up and running, if we can provide them the services, because those companies that they're going to be talking to, the 1,000 companies you talked about, they're going to be having conversations about blockchain and how can it fit inside of their strategy. If we become the hub then it just becomes one more component that we should be talking about to any of those 1,000 companies that are going to be here. They're having their event here next year. We darn sure ought to have Blockland as a speaker at that event and just insist on that. Because don't forget that the IT component of where we're going in the workforce sector partnership has a Blockland blockchain component directly in the IT. So we should make sure that it gets on that program out there and tell them about the advantages. And I had that down as a nice little segue. Thank you for bringing that up, because Monday starts the second phase of the Blockland conference. It'll be here. They have over 1,500 people coming again this year. I don't know whether anybody is, I'm sure somebody from your office is going to be there, but any of our council people, you ought to get down there and see it, because last year was standing room only at some of the events. And one does not create a success in 1 year. So this is the second year of the event, and it's for an organization that's barely 18 months old.
I would say the theme of or the thrust of your questions, Councilwoman, well, we are planting seeds here, right? So your garden doesn't grow unless you water it, you weed it. And so that is the work that's in front of us, is to do that kind of. So what I love about, again, and I don't want to keep, now that we have the loans behind us, we're able to do things that we didn't have the bandwidth to do and the discussions to engage in. And so this is the type of thing which hopefully we'll all be here when this material bears fruit, but you have to do it in order to be competitive. You have to show something distinctive about this marketplace against the historical perception that people have, that I had of it before I came here. And there's a lot here that just needs to be knitted together, as you said, I've said, we've all said. And these are unique differentiators than any other community. I can tell you Columbus wasn't happy that this is in Cuyahoga, and we should be winning our fair share of things like this versus, it's just as attractive a community and business environment.
It's just got a cool, sexy buzz to say that the London Stock Exchange elite is here in Cleveland, Ohio,
Yeah, no
as
question.
opposed to any other 50 states that could be. And
No question.
99% of the people aren't going to know how that connects to business, but
Yep.
it's got a positive spin to it that
question.
that we should be able to make some mileage.
Right, and like I said earlier, we have so many, from the time I've been here, of different well-meaning initiatives that are out there that, you're at the head of it for us here in Cuyahoga County, that make sure that we're all talking to each other, that we're not working in these silos, that workforce training and workforce development and what Tri-C is doing and Greater Cleveland Partnership and all of those. And now we have a new initiative here with the elite, that we know of each other, and that you are planting the seeds and that we're all in the same garden.
I would say,
of working
Councilwoman,
together.
one of the things that my office and team does exceptionally well is partners. So you've pressed me on this point. Should you be
Okay.
doing all these things, right? Every time I come
Yeah,
up, should
it
you be
is.
doing?
I'm sorry
should
if
you
I'm
be Should you
repetitive,
be doing
yes.
all of that? I always say to you, we don't do it. I mention it as part of what the mayor of New York City used to call that gorgeous economic development mosaic of our partners. So we still have work to do to make people more unified and collaborative.
Right.
But that's everywhere in this
Okay.
marketplace. So.
Yeah, the difference between this one and some of the other ones, like the workforce sector partnership, is something we own. This is something we're helping to facilitate to come to our town. It was already in the move. It was going to end up somewhere. We just gave them a landing place for this to land. The same thing with the Octera. They already existed in Michigan. We gave them a place to land another home here. The one that I would agree is one that we need to own and run with is the whole three workforce sector partnerships between the manufacturing, the medical, and the IT blockchain. And those are ours, and we darn well better make those successful. These other ones are, if London Stock Exchange in 3 years pulls out, that's not the same thing as if we aren't successful with these sector partnerships.
Right.
Not that I want to pull out, but
It's a good contextualization. And I'd also say, and then I won't say anything else, is that I think these are very targeted. We're not giving $1 million, right?
Yeah.
And so I know when sometimes we come to this committee and you say, well, you're spending too much. We've negotiated it down, trust me. And people always want more, but that is not kind of the context and the philosophy that the executive I had, and we're going to give the minimum amount possible. So even here, I can tell you, Mr. Hurdick will tell you, because he was on the call, he said, well, they want, we can get it done for that. And so we are a lender of last resort and sometimes a catalyst. So in Arcturus, we are leading and catalyzing other investment. But I was surprised, honestly, that the gun folks came and made the commitment publicly, because they were a little more, they said, well, what is your Economic Development Committee going to do? But Mr. Jaquay stepped up, so that's a good partnership that takes a lot of effort just to, so we're building social equity. Do you trust us? Do we trust you? So these things are starting to bear fruit. Anyway.
Thank you. Any other questions? Hearing nothing further, this meeting is adjourned, and good luck at the Board of Control when this comes up.